Before MMA took over the world, before kickboxing was even a mainstream sport, there was one man who blazed the trail. Benny the Jet Urquidez. Explosive, fearless, and unrelenting, he became the face of American kickboxing in the 1970s and 80s. With lightning-fast kicks, knockout power, and charisma to match, he wasn't just a fighter, he was a phenomenon. Born into a fighting family, Benny fused karate discipline, boxing grit, and Hollywood flair into a style that dazzled crowds across the globe. From Japan to Europe to Thailand, he stepped into hostile arenas and silenced doubters with sheer dominance. Undefeated streaks, legendary wars, and even controversies over his record only added to his myth. But Benny's story didn't end when the gloves came off. He brought martial arts to Hollywood, trained the next generation, and left a legacy that still inspires fighters today. This is the story of Benny the Jet Urquidez, the man who made kickboxing international. Before Benny the Jet Urquidez became a global icon, he was just a kid growing up in Los Angeles, surrounded by fighting on all sides. For him, martial arts wasn't a hobby, it was a family tradition, practically written into his DNA. His mother was no less formidable. A pioneer in her own right, she was both a wrestler and a black belt in judo, rare achievements for a woman in the 1950s and 60s. Add to that his siblings, many of whom also pursued martial arts, and you had a household where discipline, competition, and combat sports were everyday language. From the time Benny could walk, he was being trained. His earliest memories were of being on the mats, practicing judo throws with his mother, or working footwork drills inspired by his father's boxing background. Unlike many kids who dabble in martial arts, Benny's introduction wasn't recreational. It was serious. It was focused. His family treated training as a way of life, a shield against the streets of Los Angeles, and a foundation for discipline that extended far beyond the dojo. But what really set young Benny apart wasn't just the skills he learned at home. It was his natural explosiveness. Even as a child, he had energy that couldn't be contained. Teachers described him as restless. Coaches saw him as a bundle of fast twitch muscle, always in motion, always looking to prove himself. He was smaller than many of his peers, but his speed and aggression made up for it. And when he discovered karate, he found the perfect outlet for both his discipline and his wild streak. Karate in the 1960s and 70s was exploding in popularity across the U.S., thanks to figures like Chuck Norris, Ed Parker, and the influx of Japanese and Okinawan masters establishing schools. For Benny, karate wasn't just a new martial art. It was the arena where he could channel all his influences: boxing, judo, wrestling, and raw athleticism. He quickly excelled in tournaments, not just because he could land strikes, but because he had an instinct for timing. He wasn't just following forms, he was adapting on the fly, adjusting to opponents, and mixing styles in ways that traditionalists didn't expect. As a teenager, he built a reputation on the tournament circuit. By the late 1960s, Benny was already facing established names and holding his own. But what separated him was his refusal to back down. Point karate at the time emphasized speed and control, but Benny often pushed it right to the edge, hitting harder, moving faster, and showing flashes of the aggression that would later define his full-contact career. These early years weren't easy. Growing up in a working-class Mexican-American household, Benny faced his share of struggles outside the dojo. Los Angeles was a city of contradictions: glamour and opportunity on one side, gangs and poverty on the other. Many kids from his neighborhood fell into the wrong path. For Benny, martial arts became both a refuge and a ticket out. Training gave him a sense of identity, competing gave him purpose, and winning gave him the belief that he could be something more than just another tough kid from the streets. By the time the 1970s rolled around, Benny had already made a name for himself as a rising star in karate circles. But he wasn't satisfied with trophies and point systems. He wanted to test himself in the purest way possible, with full-contact fighting. And that decision would take him out of local gyms and onto the world stage, where Benny the Jet would soon become a household name. The 1970s were a golden era for karate tournaments in America. Gyms, high school gyms, and civic centers across the country were hosting events, and martial artists of every background were clashing under loosely unified rules. Benny Urquidez was right in the middle of it, a teenager with fire in his eyes and a reputation growing improving with every fight. Point karate was the dominant format, rewarding speed, accuracy, and control. Fighters would earn points for clean strikes that demonstrated technique, not necessarily for power or damage. But for Benny, the system always felt limiting. He wasn't just looking to touch his opponents, he wanted to dominate them, to leave no doubt who the better fighter was. This made him a controversial figure. Judges sometimes penalized him for excessive contact, but crowds loved it. He brought intensity to a format that sometimes felt too safe. Benny began traveling further, facing increasingly skilled opponents. He went toe-to-toe with names that would later become legends in their own right, like Bill Superfoot Wallace, Joe Louis. While he didn't always win, the point system wasn't built for his heavy-handed style, he always left an impression. His explosiveness, his ability to close distance in a blink, and his unrelenting pace made him stand out. It was during this period that Benny earned his nickname, the Jet. The name fit perfectly. He moved with blinding speed, launching kicks that seemed to come out of nowhere, and closing space on opponents before they had time to react. Watching him fight was like watching a plane take off. Sudden acceleration, raw power, and unstoppable momentum. But there was a turning point. As point karate's popularity peaked, fighters and promoters began experimenting with something new: full-contact karate, or what would later evolve into modern kickboxing. Instead of pulling punches or stopping at light contact, fighters would go all out. Knockouts were allowed. Strikes were thrown with bad intentions. It was no longer about points. It was about survival. Benny didn't hesitate. For him, this was the format he had been waiting for. He transitioned seamlessly, his karate foundation giving him balance and precision, his boxing background giving him hands that could actually hurt people, and his natural aggression perfectly suited for full-contact rules. When the Professional Karate Association, PKA, began organizing full-contact bouts in the mid-70s, Benny was among the first to step into the ring. His fights were unlike anything American audiences had seen before. Where many karate fighters struggled to adjust to the intensity of full contact, Benny thrived. He wasn't just winning, he was finishing. Spinning back kicks to the body, overhand rights to the jaw, flurries of punches and kicks that overwhelmed opponents. Every fight felt like a storm, and Benny was the lightning in the middle of it. By the late 1970s, Urquidez had established himself as one of the most exciting and feared full-contact fighters in America. But his ambitions didn't stop there. While many of his peers were content to dominate U.S. circuits, Benny set his eyes overseas. He wanted to prove himself not just as an American champion, but as one of the best fighters on the planet. And that meant taking his style into the lion's den: Japan, Thailand, and beyond. By the time the 1970s closed, Benny the Jet Urquidez wasn't just a karate champion, he was becoming the face of a new sport. Kickboxing, still in its infancy, was searching for stars who could bring legitimacy, excitement, and a global following. Benny was all three. The transition from karate to kickboxing wasn't easy for everyone. Some fighters struggled with the longer rounds, the heavier contact, and the inclusion of boxing combinations. But Benny thrived. His father's boxing influence gave him crisp hands, his karate training gave him kicks few could anticipate, and his natural athleticism allowed him to fight with a pace most couldn't match. What made Benny unique was his ability to blend styles seamlessly. While many fighters leaned too heavily on either their karate or boxing, Benny combined both, creating a hybrid style that felt ahead of its time. He'd step in with fast jabs, pivot into spinning back kicks, and follow with flurries of hooks and body shots. He was unpredictable, dynamic, and aggressive. His fights became events. Crowds came not just to see who Benny was fighting, but to see what Benny would do. Would he land another knockout spinning kick? Would he overwhelm another opponent with relentless combinations? Every fight felt like a spectacle, and Benny embraced the spotlight. But it wasn't just about showmanship. Benny was racking up wins, a lot of them. His undefeated streak became a talking point, as did his ability to fight across multiple weight classes. He wasn't content to dominate a single division. He wanted to prove he could beat anyone, anywhere, regardless of size. It was during this time that promoters began sending Benny overseas. Japan, in particular, became a key battleground. Japanese audiences, who had already embraced martial arts legends like Mas-Oyama and were obsessed with the purity of combat, were skeptical of American fighters. Many believed the U.S. lacked the discipline and technical mastery of Japanese karateka. Benny proved them wrong. His first fights in Japan stunned audiences, not just because he won, but because he did it decisively, often against fighters who were considered national heroes. These international clashes helped transform Benny from an American star into a global one. He was no longer just a karate kid from Los Angeles. He was now a martial artist who carried a American kickboxing into the international spotlight, forcing fans and critics alike to acknowledge that the sport had a new face, and it belonged to the Jet. By the early 1980s, Benny Urquidez wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for the legitimacy of an entire sport. Every win was a statement, every knockout a declaration. Kickboxing had arrived, and Benny was its champion. By the early 1980s, Benny "the Jet" Urquidez was no longer just an American star. He was becoming a global ambassador for kickboxing. But with international recognition came international skepticism. Many in Asia, particularly in Japan and Thailand, dismissed American kickboxers as flashy but untested, lacking the depth and grit of their homegrown champions. Benny took that personally. To him, the only way to silence the critics was to walk straight into their backyards and prove himself in their rings. Japan was his first great proving ground. Promoters there loved spectacle, and Benny fit the bill perfectly. Lightning-fast kicks, knockout power, and a flamboyant personality. His first major fight on Japanese soil came against Kunimatsu Okauchi, a revered karate fighter. Japanese audiences expected their champion to dismantle this American intruder. Instead, they watched in shock as Benny overwhelmed Okauchi with a mix of precision boxing and devastating kicks. The knockout victory was so decisive that Japanese fans, initially hostile, began applauding him. Respect was earned not through words, but through violence delivered in the ring. But it wasn't just Japan. Benny traveled throughout Europe, taking fights against opponents from France, the Netherlands, and Germany. Each fight added to his mystique. He wasn't a protected champion fighting only in the United States. He was a globe-trotting warrior, willing to face whoever was put in front of him, no matter the rule set or country. This attitude separated him from many American fighters of the time, who were content to dominate domestic circuits. Then came Thailand, the birthplace of Muay Thai, and arguably the most brutal striking culture in the world. To Thais, kickboxing without knees and elbows wasn't real fighting. Benny knew stepping into their world was dangerous. Thai fighters were conditioned from childhood, hardened by countless stadium bouts, and bred in a culture that lived and breathed Muay Thai. Still, Benny didn't back down. In Bangkok, he faced some of the toughest challenges of his career. The rule sets were different, the atmosphere hostile, and the opponents relentless. These weren't point karate fighters or Western kickboxers. They were Muay Thai warriors who could absorb punishment and fire back with bone-crushing counters. Benny's willingness to step into their arena, to fight under their rules, earned him something more valuable than wins: respect. Even in defeat, he showed courage. Even in victory, he remained humble. These international clashes elevated Benny's reputation. He was no longer just the Jet, a flashy nickname from the American circuit. He had become a true martial arts ambassador. Japanese magazines wrote about him. Thai newspapers debated him. European promoters clamored for his appearances. He had become a symbol of cross-cultural competition, a fighter who proved that martial arts was a universal language. And through it all, Benny kept winning, or at least he kept surviving. By the mid-1980s, he had fought in nearly every corner of the globe, piling up victories, titles, and a growing mythos. But with his fame came scrutiny, and soon debates over his undefeated record and the legitimacy of his opponents would swirl into one of the most enduring controversies of his career. One of the most fascinating aspects of Benny Urquidez's career is his record, or rather, the controversy around it. For years, promoters and fans alike touted his undefeated streak, often cited as 49-0, with numerous world titles across different weight classes. On paper, it was the kind of record that put him alongside boxing icons like Rocky Marciano or Floyd Mayweather. But unlike boxing, kickboxing in the 1970s and 80s was chaotic, fragmented, and inconsistent when it came to record-keeping. There were multiple sanctioning bodies, each with their own rules. Some fights were classified as exhibitions in one country, but considered official in another. Weight classes weren't always standardized, and depending on the promoter, a bout might be reported differently in different regions. As a result, Benny's record became a subject of constant debate. Critics argued that not all of his opponents were world-class. Others pointed to disputed results in Japan and Thailand, where local rule sets muddied the waters. The most famous controversy surrounded a bout in Thailand, where some sources claimed Benny lost to a Muay Thai fighter under modified rules. Urquidez himself disputed the result, stating that the match had been labeled an exhibition and shouldn't count on his record. His defenders argued that even if you discounted certain fights, his dominance was still undeniable. After all, this was a man who fought across 5 5 different weight classes, from lightweight to light heavyweight, and held titles in nearly all of them. But here's the truth. Controversy only added to his legend. The mystery surrounding his record made Benny larger than life. Was he truly undefeated? Did he really conquer the best from every continent? Or was some of it smoke and mirrors? Fans debated, but promoters leaned into it. The myth of the Jet was more powerful than any technicality, and to Benny's credit, he never shied away from challenges. He didn't carefully curate his opponents to protect a spotless record. He fought in foreign lands, against hometown heroes, under rules that often disadvantaged him. Whether or not his record was truly perfect, his courage to step into the unknown was unquestionable. By the late 1980s, Benny's career had become a blend of fact and folklore. His spinning back kick knockouts were immortalized in grainy VHS tapes. His nickname echoed in martial arts magazines across the globe. And his record, disputed though it may have been, made him a figure of awe. But Benny wasn't just about wins and numbers. What made him truly special was how he fought, his style, his philosophy, and the way he carried himself as both a warrior and a teacher. What made Benny the Jet Urquidez different wasn't just his record or his travel schedule, it was the way he fought, a style that felt decades ahead of its time. While most American kickboxers were essentially karate fighters with gloves, Benny was something else entirely. He blended the footwork of boxing, the stance of karate, and the creativity of a street fighter into a package that was both efficient and explosive. His signature move, the spinning back kick, became legendary. Delivered with blinding speed and pinpoint accuracy, it was capable of ending fights in an instant. Unlike many fighters who used spinning techniques as risky, flashy flourishes, Benny turned it into a reliable weapon. He drilled it endlessly, refining it until it became second nature. Opponents could know it was coming and still couldn't stop it. But Benny's arsenal didn't stop there. He had crisp boxing combinations, developed from hours of sparring with his father's influence. His jab was sharp, his cross heavy, and his hooks fluid. He could switch seamlessly between karate kicks to the body and traditional boxing combos to the head. His versatility made him unpredictable, and unpredictability made him dangerous. Training was another cornerstone of his success. Benny wasn't just talented, he was obsessive. His conditioning was legendary, with workouts designed to push him past exhaustion. He drilled kicks hundreds of times per session, shadowboxed until his muscles ached, and sparred relentlessly. His philosophy was simple. The body is a weapon, and a weapon must always be sharp. But beyond the physical, Benny emphasized the mental. He often spoke about respect, discipline, and the importance of mindset. He viewed fighting not as a brawl, but as an art form. To him, stepping into the ring was an extension of personal philosophy, a way to express oneself honestly without pretense. He carried a traditional martial artist's humility, even as he thrived in the flashy commercial world of 1980s kickboxing. And perhaps most importantly, Benny never saw martial arts as just a career. It was his life's work. Even outside of competition, he was a teacher, passing on knowledge to students of all ages. His schools emphasized not only technique, but also character, building fighters who respected the art as much as they respected the fight. By the 1990s, Benny's style and philosophy had become influential far beyond the ring. Fighters across the world studied his tapes. Hollywood choreographers sought his expertise, and students flocked to his dojos, eager to learn not just how to fight like the Jet, but how to think like him. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Benny Urquidez had already built his name in rings across the world. But a new stage awaited him: Hollywood. Unlike many fighters whose styles didn't translate well outside of competition, Benny's background in karate, kickboxing, and even point fighting made him a natural fit for film choreography. He didn't just throw strikes, he moved with rhythm and precision. His kicks looked devastating and cinematic, and his timing made him a dream partner for stunt teams and directors. Hollywood's growing obsession with martial arts films gave Benny the opportunity to showcase his abilities beyond the arena. He was cast in various roles, often as villains or side characters, where his presence elevated fight scenes. But his most iconic contributions weren't as an actor, they were as a choreographer and fight coordinator. He had a knack for blending realism with spectacle, making fight scenes feel both authentic and dramatic. One of the highlights of his Hollywood career came through his collaboration with Jackie Chan. Chan, already a global superstar, was known for his fast-paced, innovative choreography that blended comedy, danger, and martial arts mastery. When Benny worked with Chan, the chemistry was undeniable. Their fight in Dragons Forever, 1988, is still considered one of the greatest martial arts sequences ever filmed. The clash between Chan's acrobatic style and Benny's explosive, full-contact kickboxing created a balance of grace and brutality that stunned audiences. Hollywood gave Benny something fighting couldn't: permanence. While victories fade with time and athletic careers end, films immortalized him. Generations who never saw him fight live still discovered him through VHS tapes and DVDs of martial arts movies. For many casual fans, Benny became that guy who fought Jackie Chan, not realizing that behind the camera stood one of the greatest full-contact fighters in history. But unlike some athletes who lose themselves in the glitz of Hollywood, Benny never let film overshadow his identity as a martial artist. Acting and choreography were extensions of his craft, another way to express movement and discipline. He brought the same respect, intensity, and humility to the set that he did to the ring. And while the cameras introduced him to millions, his true legacy was still being written in the gyms and dojos where he continued to teach. As Benny Urquidez's fighting career slowed, his role as a teacher grew larger. He understood something many fighters didn't: that victories fade, but teaching creates legacy. His dojos became hubs of not just physical training, but personal development. Students didn't just learn how to punch and kick, they learned how to think, how to respect, and how to carry themselves in life. Benny emphasized fundamentals. He drilled the importance of stance, balance, and breathing, making sure his students understood the art's foundation before adding flair. But he also shared the jet philosophy, the idea that a martial artist is both a warrior and a human being, responsible for more than just fighting. He spoke often about humility, about respecting opponents, and about controlling ego. What separated Benny from many coaches was his openness. He wasn't just training future competitors, he was building communities. Parents brought their kids to his dojos not only to learn self-defense, but to gain confidence, discipline, and structure. Fighters who aspired to compete found a mentor who had been to the highest peaks of the sport and knew the sacrifices it required. Many notable martial artists and Hollywood stunt professionals trained under him. His name became a stamp of authenticity. If someone said they had learned from Benny the Jet, they instantly carried credibility. He wasn't stingy with knowledge. He believed martial arts should be shared, not hoarded, but Benny also adapted. He understood that martial arts was evolving, especially with the rise of MMA in the 1990s and 2000s. While some traditionalists rejected the new era, Benny embraced it. He respected the athletes, acknowledged the effectiveness of different styles, and even adjusted his teaching to incorporate concepts of cross-training. His background, blending karate, boxing, kickboxing, and even elements of judo from his childhood, made him a natural bridge between old-school martial arts and modern combat sports. Through seminars, demonstrations, and appearances at martial arts conventions, Benny continued to spread his philosophy worldwide. He became a living link between eras, a reminder of the golden days of karate and kickboxing, while also serving as proof that the values of discipline and respect never go out of style. Teaching wasn't just something Benny did after retirement, it was his calling. And for many who walked through his doors, the lessons they took weren't about winning fights, they were about winning in life, through perseverance, humility, and an unbreakable spirit. Today, when people talk about Benny the Jet Urquidez, they're not just talking about a fighter, they're talking about a pioneer, a teacher, and a cultural icon. His career spanned decades, continents, and mediums. He was as comfortable trading blows in Bangkok as he was choreographing fight scenes in Hollywood. Few martial artists can claim such a broad and lasting impact. His record, controversial as it may be, remains a symbol of dominance. His style inspired countless fighters, from kickboxers to MMA athletes, many of whom studied his tapes to understand timing, explosiveness, and the blending of karate with boxing. His spinning back kick has been immortalized as one of the deadliest techniques in martial arts history, replicated in gyms worldwide, but rarely mastered with the same ferocity. Beyond the fights, Benny's legacy is built on respect. He proved that an American fighter could travel abroad, face the toughest challenges, and return with both victories and the respect of cultures that once doubted him. In an era when martial arts often divided along nationalistic lines, Benny served as proof that skill and heart transcended borders. In Hollywood, his influence can still be felt in the way martial arts are portrayed on screen. The realism, the intensity, the fusion of technique and drama, much of that owes to the fighters trainers and choreographers like Benny, who brought their authenticity to the industry. He made fight scenes more than just entertainment. He made them a celebration of martial artistry. But perhaps his greatest legacy is invisible, found in the thousands of students he mentored, the fighters he inspired, and the people whose lives he touched through teaching. For every knockout he delivered, there are countless stories of young students who gained confidence, discipline, or direction because they trained under the Jet. Today, Benny Urquidez stands not just as a retired champion, but as a bridge between karate and kickboxing, between East and West, between sport and art, between the past and the future of martial arts. And that's the story of Benny the Jet Urquidez, the kid from Los Angeles who turned a restless childhood into a lifetime of victories, who took American kickboxing onto the world stage, who fought legends abroad, who became immortal on film, and who still teaches the values of respect, discipline, and heart. A fighter, a teacher, a legend. The Jet.